Right from the first line of Genesis, we're invited to put God back at the center, to realign your vision of the world to the way it actually is and to the God who created it. Good morning. It's great to be with you today. Thank you for that introduction. As Pete said, for those of you that don't know me, my husband and I moved to Emmaus a couple of years ago, and we run a collective. And you might have seen Seth running around in high vis asking for more people to sign up to the Emmaus Roadies. That's what he's most known for at the moment. Last week, Peter Burton introduced our new sermon series, in which we'll be going through the book The God Story. I'm so excited to get to go through chapter 1 with you, which is the creation story, or the origin. As Pete said, I studied theology at university, and the creation story was actually the topic of my dissertation, so it's one I'm super passionate about. In fact, I love this story so much that on my first date with Seth, I made him read all 12,000 words of my dissertation on creation, and then asked him what he thought of it. He said he liked it, but then months later admitted to me he had no idea what he'd just read. I've mellowed out at least a little bit since then, so I won't make you all read a 12,000-word essay today, and you should all be very grateful for that. What we are going to read is the biblical story of creation. But before we read it through, I'm just going to set the lens for how I'd like us to think about it as we read it. I won't be looking at whether this account of creation is factual or metaphorical. No matter whether you think this is a scientifically accurate story or not, I'd like us to ask these 3 questions. What does this story have to say about God? What does it have to say about the world that we live in? And what does it say about me? Over this series, we're going to be going through the story of the entire Bible together as a church. And this is an amazing opportunity, not just to know the Bible better, but to better know God, the world we live in, and ourselves. Peter Burton said last week that the aims for this series are to know and love the author, to understand our part in the story, and to be able to share that story with others. This is a story that we're part of. What you think of this book has implications on how you will live your life. A.W. Tozer once claimed, "What comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you." So please do hold those 3 questions in your head, and if you have your Bibles with you, then turn to Genesis 1, chapter 1. We want to lay a strong foundation, so we'll be reading the whole chapter, and then we'll deal with these 3 questions one at a time. If it would help you, then please close your eyes as we read this chapter together. Think about what it's saying and picture those 3 questions. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. Then God said, "Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth. God called the space sky. And evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear." And that is what happened. God called the dry ground land and the waters seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant and trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came." And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. and evening passed, and morning came, marking the third day. Then God said, "Let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth." And that is what happened. God made two great lights, one larger one to govern the day and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas and the birds multiply on the earth." And evening passed and morning came, marking the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals." And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." Then God said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And I have given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and all the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life." And that is what happened. Then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. Any writer can tell you that the first line of a book needs to be a good one. The first sentence in a story needs to make you want to read more. It can set the scene, it can introduce one of the characters, it needs to have a hook that makes you keep reading. The greatest first lines are the ones that you remember, that when you read them, you recognize them and you think you know the story that leads on from it. So I have a few famous first lines from books here, and let's see if they pass the test, if we can remember the story that follows them. So the first one is, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Yeah, I heard some of you shouting that out. That is absolutely Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. In fact, I think that was my dad. Yeah, wonderful first line. Then the second one. "When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton." Absolutely, it is The Lord of the Rings. Some of you knew that from like the second word. The name gives it away. And then the last one I have, "All children except one grow up." Peter Pan, absolutely. The whole story is in that first line. These first lines are so clever because they all tell us something about one of the characters or the setting, and they connect us into the story. Look at The Lord of the Rings. As soon as you read the words 11th birthday, you know that that is not a world like ours. When you read the opening line of Pride and Prejudice, you know that you're about to read a witty love story. These are spectacular first lines. And here is another. "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." In one sentence, we know who this story is about. We know the setting it takes place in, and we know that this God is the creator of it all. The first of our three questions was, what does this story say about God? Well, the word God here in biblical Hebrew is Elohim, which is actually a plural word. Now, don't worry, I'm not suggesting that there are multiple gods, but I think the fact that it's a plural word says something about God's character. In the New Testament, in John's Gospel, he retells the creation story in chapter 1. He starts by saying, "In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God." The Word is another way of saying Jesus. So where in Genesis we have "in the beginning God," in John's Gospel we have "in the beginning the Word." John is so clearly trying to point something out to us. Elohim, the God we read about in the first line of the Bible, is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. The God in this story is a relational God. He existed in perfect relationship already, and when he created the heavens and the earth, it wasn't out of loneliness or a need for interaction. It was out of love. In this book we're going through, The God Story, Alan Emerson says, creation can only be understood as an overflow of perfect love. There are many different stories from many different religions about how and why the earth was made, but only in the Bible do you get a story where creation was so obviously out of love. As well as relational, we know that this God is eternal. The Bible starts by saying, "In the beginning, God." That means before there was anything, there was God. He didn't just shape the world into what it was. That happens next. He created it out of nothing. And he was there before there was anything. The world is not eternal. The world is created. Even the heavens are not eternal. They were made just like the earth was. The only eternal thing is God himself. Those four words, "in the beginning, God," make it clear that as much as the Bible is a story about us, the main character is God himself. The world doesn't revolve around us. It revolves around God. For a long time, most people believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Then, in 1543, a man named Copernicus published a theory that instead of the sun revolving around the earth actually revolved around the sun. This theory sparked a revolution in thinking and a whole heap of controversy. We don't like to be told that we're not at the center of the universe. And you see this self-centeredness reflected in our culture. You hear people saying things like, "Look out for number one," or "You deserve better." A survey by Pew Research Center found that 1 in 3 photos taken by people aged 18 to 24 is a selfie. We live in a culture that is obsessed with self, and it's not good for us. Andrew Ollerton, author of the Bible course, says that we humans don't flourish when we think we're at the center. Instead, this belief produces a cocktail of arrogance and control, anxiety and despair. Right from the first line of Genesis, we're invited to put God back at the center, to realign your vision of the world to the way it actually is and to the God who created it. So now we know a little of the title character. We've been introduced to God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, eternal, relational, and who this story is about. The rest of Genesis, chapter 1, builds up a picture of the world he's creating, which brings us to our second question. What does this story have to say about the world that we live in? Verse 2 gives us the starting point. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. The starting point is described as formless and empty, and God deals with those words one at a time. He spends the first 2.5 days shaping what was formless, adding structure, And then the rest of the time he spends taking what was empty and filling it with good things. It's like this: when you paint with watercolors, you don't just paint every single detail of one little bit of the painting and then move on and do the same with another section. You build it up a layer at a time. You paint maybe the lightest layer first, and then you build it up and finish with the details that bring the whole picture to life. And that's what the writer of the creation story is doing. They build it up section at a time, and through doing so, we get to learn about the world that we live in. Instead of layers in a painting, the author of the creation story has split it into 6 days. I've put these 6 days onto the screen for you. As you can see, in the first half of the story, on each day, something is separated. These days are about giving structure to what was formless. The second half of the story is about taking that empty structure and filling it with good things: fish, birds, animals, and then finally people. After most of these days, it says, "And God saw what he had made and saw that it was good." That's the wording we expect to see at the end of each day. But there are 3 days which are treated slightly differently. So we're going to look more carefully at those 3 to help us answer that question. What does this story have to say about the world that we live in? On day 1, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated it from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. And evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. He created the light. He declared it good. And then he separated it from the darkness. And then it's the next day. We don't get a judgment on the separation part of what happened. We know the light is good, but the author was careful to say it was good before it was separated from the darkness. We get a retelling of this bit of the story in John 1, verses 4 and 5. The word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. Now, we know that when John says the word, he's talking about Jesus. He's talking about the creation story that we just read, and he's saying that Jesus brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. He's asking us to treat light and darkness as more than a physical concept. A question for any parents in the room. Do your kids have any sayings that don't make any sense to the outside world, but you know exactly what they mean? I have a nephew who just turned 5, and to this day he calls mayonnaise menu. At home this is fine because he asks for menu and we know to go and get the mayonnaise, other than his granddad Merv, who's over there, who looks at him in complete confusion. We also know not to let him squeeze the mayonnaise bottle himself, but that's another story. But when we go out for dinner and he asks the waiter for menu, that gets a lot more confusing. It's funny the sayings we pick up in our households and from the kids in our lives. When I was little and I wanted the light on, I would ask my parents to turn the dark off. Now, as adults, we know that that's ridiculous. The dark isn't a thing that you put into a space and then remove. It was dark already, and then you turn the light on, which overpowers it. The switches in your house don't turn the dark on and off, they turn the light on. Notice that the Bible doesn't say that God created the darkness. The darkness is simply an absence of the light, an absence of the good thing that God created. Just like the light switches in your house, God didn't turn on the dark. He created and turned on the light, and the darkness couldn't extinguish it. This is a classic tale, light versus dark. When you hear the words the dark side of the force, you know that that's not the side you're supposed to root for. This language is used all over the Bible, and it starts here in verse 3 on the first page. So that's day 1. The light was created, declared good, and then it was separated from the darkness. End of the first day. On day 2, God said, "Let there be a space between the waters, to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth. And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. Some of you are probably sitting there wondering, what does this even mean? And that is a fair question. What do you mean he separated the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth? It brings to mind the image of a sea of water in the sky above the water on the ground. It doesn't make any sense. We all know what happens when you hold a volume of water above someone's head. That person tends to get soaked a split second later. Different Bibles translate this bit differently. They might say to separate the waters from the waters, or they might say sky instead of heaven. But the Hebrew word used here is the same word used in verse 1 when God made the heavens and the earth. And it's the same word used to talk about heaven in the rest of the Old Testament. The most interesting thing about this day is that it's the only day of creation where nothing is declared good. You can go back to Genesis and check. Nothing on day 2 is declared good. This isn't a mistake. It's done on purpose. So why is it there, and what does it mean for us? If the light is good, then why separate it from the darkness? If the world was made by a relational God, then why separate the heavens from the earth, from the waters from the waters? One day, the Bible tells us we will live in a world where there is no darkness, no need for stars or sun because the light of God is everywhere. It tells us that one day we will live in a world where heaven and earth come together. These separations that we read about in Genesis will one day be undone. So why were they put there? The answer comes from what God does next. He fills the world he's created with good things. He makes plants and trees and declares them good. He makes stars, suns, and moons and declares them good. Then he makes fish, then birds, then all kinds of animals, declaring each of them good. And then he makes us. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And us, he declares very good. This is the crescendo moment of creation. This is the part where it all comes into fruition. God created us in his own image. Another word for a smaller person who looks a bit like you, created out of love, is a child. God made us to be his children. And that brings us to our third question. What does this story have to say about me? You were made to be a child of God. He created you out of love in his own image to be his children. Then God says, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." God is the creator of the world. He is the ultimate authority, but he invites us to reign over his creation. He's not inviting us to be dictators, but to join him in the family business of lovingly serving his creation. He made a world, and then he gave it to us to live in and to look after. I was recently at a baby shower, and it came to that part of the day where the mum-to-be was opening presents. This was a lucky mum because she had a lot of crafty friends, and I don't mean that they were sneaky, I mean that they excelled at arts and crafts. And so she was opening her gifts, and it was beautiful handmade item after beautiful handmade item. We're talking amazing quilts where each section has a chosen and meaningful image. Little booties knitted by hand that are almost as cute as an actual baby. For some reason, as soon as a sock is small enough that you can wear it on your thumb, it becomes the cutest thing in the whole world. So the soon-to-be mum was opening these things, and everyone, including me, was exclaiming about how cute everything was. She'd open a present, hold it up, and we'd all say, "Oh, it's so cute," or "Oh, it's so tiny." And the notes accompanying the gifts were almost poetic, saying how a prayer had gone into every stitch. And then it came time for her to open my present. Now, I'm not afraid of a craft project, but on this occasion, I had looked at the gift list that had been on the invitation, selected something that looked practical, and placed it in a gift bag with a note. And by gift bag, I mean John and Lewis paper bag. So I'm at the party, and every present so far has been handmade just for the recipient. And then they pick up a white bag, and I remember what I've done. When the mum opens this gift, there are no awes or saying how cute it is. I have brought her a nappy caddy. A nappy caddy is essentially a big bag for nappies and other nappy-related items. And that's a fair enough thing to give to new parents. It's practical, helpful. Yeah, I see you nodding. But then I remembered the note. In a sea of notes, praying for the soon-to-be mum, I had written, "To help with all the poop, love from Rachel." Not quite the same vibe as a beautifully handcrafted blanket with deep meaning in each stitch. The thing is, when you give someone a gift that you've made yourself, assuming, of course, you're the kind of person that can do that, it's made with someone in mind. It's designed specifically for that person. God made the world knowing he was going to create us in his image, and he gave it to us to live in and look after. He designed it with us in mind. Those separations we talked about earlier between light and darkness, the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth, were not design flaws. They were put there because God knew what he was going to do next. He gave us the best gift he could have given. He gave us a choice. We'll hear more about what that choice looked like next week. But here's the thing about choices. There needs to be more than one option. When your partner says to you, "Would you like to wash the dishes?" that is not a choice. There is only one option, and that is to do the dishes. Seth, my husband, calls this a wife trap, and he's a very wise man because it is a trap. For it to be a real choice, there has to be more than one thing to choose from. God doesn't do that to us. He creates a world in which we can genuinely choose, and he gives us the space in which to do that. He separates the light from the darkness, and he separates the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth. And he does both, so that when he says we are free to choose, we are genuinely free to do so. If there was only light, if there was only unity, then we wouldn't really have a choice at all. Alan Emerson says in The God Story, God did not make robots. He could never force humankind to love him, or it wouldn't be perfect love. God's holy love speaks of ultimate freedom. God was not laying down a demand to love him in the creation of humanity. Rather, he was carrying a hope in his heart, a hope that we would freely return the love he has for us. God's hope is that we, the people he made out of love to be his children, would choose to love him back. And he perfectly designed a world to give us the free choice to do so, or to choose not to. That option isn't an accident or flaw that's uncovered in chapter 3. It was written in on page 1 long before the fall. So going back to our 3 questions, what does this story have to say about God? God is love incarnate. He is light in the darkness and the only eternal thing in the universe. But what does this story have to say about the world? The world was created out of love, with us in mind, and set up to give us a genuine choice. And what does this story have to say about me? You were made in the image of God to be loved by him, but he will not force you to love him back. He gives us authority and a purpose to join him in lovingly serving his creation. Like I said at the start, this is a story that we're all living in, whether we believe it or not. I'd like to invite you this morning to think about the story you're living. There are some things that when you believe them, they change the way you live your life. Just this week at work, someone said to me that they didn't know why they were here, that they felt like they should have been made as a rock or an animal, not a person. Imagine if that person believed those things, that would change their life. So this is the main thing I'd like us to reflect on as we go from here. Does the way you think of yourself match up to what the Bible says about you? Especially for this chapter, I'd love for us to focus on identity and authority. Do you walk around knowing you're a loved child of God? And secondly, do you act as someone who's been given authority within the family business? I'm just going to pray to close. Father, thank you that you made us to be your children, that we were made out of love and with a purpose. Please help us live our lives in both of those truths. Amen.